Welcome to the fourth episode of Masters and Matches with me, Arne Moll.
And me, Peter Doggers.
Peter, we have a very special episode this time. It's about the Wimbledon of Chess, which is the Wijk aan Zee tournament held every year in the Netherlands. And we thought it would be fun to have 10 moments or 10 memories associated with this tournament and hopefully give a nice overview of this tournament and what makes it so special.
Yeah, definitely. Very exciting. We're in the month of January again. And of course, this for chess players is the special month because it is always so strongly connected to the tournament in Wijk aan Zee. This year, 2026, it will be the 88th edition already.
Wow.
So a very long running tournament that we're talking about. And I guess we're lucky being Dutch chess fans to have such an event in our own country, still taking place.
Yeah, we're really lucky. So the first question that we wanted to discuss is why this tournament is so special. What makes it so unique in the world of chess? And for me, the key word there is the atmosphere. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, definitely. There are definitely things that you don't see really at other events. Yeah, it's a combination of the location, this very small coastal town. What is it, about 25 kilometers west of Amsterdam?
Yeah, half an hour drive.
On the coast. Not easy to reach, to be honest, by public transport. Easier by car. Yeah, the venue, the thing that all the grandmasters are always playing together with hundreds of amateurs in one location together. The fact that this tiny town also means that you can meet any grandmaster in the morning or in the evening just by strolling down the street or eating in the same restaurant. We'll talk about it more, but yeah, those are very typical aspects of this event for me, apart from the fact that it's also one of the strongest tournaments of the calendar.
Yeah, for me also another important element is the traditional pea soup. There is a famous snack that you can get during the tournament, which is soup made of green peas with sausage, which is very traditional and actually has a rich history. We'll get to that. And of course, indeed, you can meet grandmasters just on the beach or wherever you happen to be. It's a really unique atmosphere, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Let me start with a quote by the famous Dutch grandmaster and writer Jan-Hein Donner. Actually, he preferred himself to be called Hein Donner by friends, and everyone else was supposed to call him J.H. Donner. But let's call him just Donner for our podcast. He wrote in 1969 about basically going to the opening ceremony of his event. It is because of the opening of the Hoogovens Chess Tournament in the Kennemerduin Hotel that the chess player realizes he is a week into the new year, and he sets out on the somewhat difficult journey to this annual chess circus. It is even further away than usual, since last year the venue moved from Beverwijk to Wijk aan Zee, a place not easy to reach in rough weather. Most participants therefore avail themselves of the comfortable B&Bs, with only an inveterate loner setting out on the way to the metropolis of Amsterdam late at night. Yesterday the weather was fine, and the travelers arriving from all over the world were given a hearty welcome by local youngsters at the tournament hall. There was no end of merry remarks like, "Have you seen the goatee on that one there?" or "Who's that loon?" and "Oof, they're Russians." Our doings will be the talk of the town for the next few weeks.
Yeah, very recognizable. The local villagers of Wijk aan Zee must love us and hate us, right? As chess players, every year we come there for a few weeks, strange, boring guys, and then we're gone again.
More and more ladies and women, I would say as well. But yeah,
True.
Dominated still by the male sex, I guess. Hundreds of amateurs and dozens of strong players suddenly sort of dominating the street view and the restaurants, taking over the village, it feels like, yeah.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the tournament moved from Beverwijk, a small town near Haarlem, to Wijk aan Zee in 1968. And it was held in the Wijk aan Zee location that it's still held today from 1980 onwards. And that's the location of De Moriaan. It's a very typical place, I would say. quite small. There are always many people in that venue. There's a cafe area and then there is a big playing hall. The playing hall is a sports complex. So there is a playing area, a huge playing area, and there are also locker rooms which are transformed into a press room during the tournament. But the Moriaan itself, that's the cafe area. I would say it has a nice combination of chess players, TV screens where often the skating is displayed, skating championships, but also a very lively bar with people sitting there making orders. And it's all a little clumsy maybe, but also very cozy. And that combination of clumsiness and coziness, I think, is a little typical Dutch. I like it really a lot. But only once a year, to be honest. Then after Hoogovens tournament, I'm already through with it.
But it's definitely also always nice to return when it starts again. Actually, we've also played ourselves several times because, as I said, it's not just a tournament for grandmasters. It's also famous for having a lot of amateur groups. And I think you already played in the late 80s, right?
Yes, yeah, it already brings us to the second aspect of Wijk aan Zee that we wanted to discuss, which is the very large amateur tournament that is always happening at the same time. I played for the first time in 1989, which I played a 4-round or 3-round tournament with 4 players. Very low. I was still starting out in chess. And I remember from that year, 1989, that Viswanathan Anand played for the first time in Wijk aan Zee. He was very young, talented, handsome young man. And it made a big impression. I think he shared first place in the end. But he was definitely the star of the tournament. And he returned many times in subsequent years, of course. But for me, it was the first time to see him. And it was quite impressive. But actually, I was already in Wijk aan Zee in 1988, the year before, although I did not participate myself, but a friend of my father's, he took me to the tournament together with my father, and I was lucky enough to see Michael Tal there. He participated in that year, the former world champion, the magician of Riga, and he also made a big impression. I saw him just for 1 second or 2 seconds, but still, I remember that very vividly, almost 40 years later. So, good memories for me, and I think many amateurs playing even now, they are similarly happy to see all those big stars from the current tournament practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and apparently it is and has been always very important and special for grandmasters playing as well. I think it's telling that there is a famous quote from Bent Larsen, the former Danish World Championship candidate. That quote is hanging in the playing hall still in Wijk aan Zee. And that goes, "Normal people have to see Naples before they die, but a chess grandmaster has to win Wijk aan Zee first."
Well, not for us, I guess. But what was your first memory in Wijk aan Zee as a player?
I remember very early in the 1990s going there as a spectator. But somewhere from the mid-90s, I started playing there as well. Sometimes in the weekend 3-round event. But I've also played in the 9-round event. In the mid-90s, there was also a group that was called the Reserve Master Group. And as the name suggested, there were multiple IMs and sometimes also grandmasters playing in that group. It was usually around 40 players, and it followed the Swiss pairing system, and the winner would qualify for the Grandmaster Group B. And famously in Wijk aan Zee, throughout all the amateur groups into the Grandmaster groups, there is a promotion and relegation system. So theoretically, you can start from Group 8 and promote yourself every year until the Reserve Master Group. And by winning that, you would qualify for the Grandmaster Group B. And then by winning the Grandmaster Group B, you would reach the top echelon, the Grandmaster Group A. And theoretically, you could play against people like Anand and Kasparov. So I've always liked that system of promotion and relegation in Wijk aan Zee because, it gives a special charm of sort of democratic idea that anyone out there has a theoretical chance to play at the absolute top level.
Just win 60 games in a row.
Yeah, every year in January you have to be in top shape and then you could theoretically reach it, yeah. I remember one participation of mine in the Reserve Master Group in the mid-90s. I think I scored 4.5 out of 9 there with a few draws against some IMs. So as a young and upcoming amateur player. I was quite happy with that result.
Yeah, that's impressive.
And I vividly remember one game, and especially the post-mortem of that game I played. It was with the black pieces against a player called Krnic, who was at the time the editor-in-chief of Chess Informant. And it was an English opening, symmetrical English, so 1 c4, c5. And there was quite a bit of theory involved. And as expected, I was slowly outplayed and lost that game. And well, I was also still hoping to learn from it. So I asked if we could analyze. And Mr. Krnic from Yugoslavia, he said, yeah, good idea. And I think I know a good place where we can analyze in the quiet. And suddenly he took me through the corridor backstage. It was into what was also the press room, and still is the press room, at the backstage of the playing hall. And yeah, there is always this door, and it's now for years already. There is always a guard in front of it, and you have to have a special card to open that door. And suddenly Mr. Krnic just went in because he had his connections and he knew people and he knew the organizers. And he took me into the corridor, and we actually ended up in one of the locker rooms. And there we started analyzing our game. So being in that environment was already sort of special because, yeah, being backstage, just like at music concerts, it's a bit of holy ground, right? You're not supposed to be there as a simple young amateur. But he just took me there, and nobody minded, and we started analyzing. Until at some point the door opened, and none other than Anatoly Karpov entered, together with 2 crew members of the Dutch sports news. And we were like, oh, what is Mr. Karpov doing here? Apparently he had finished his game. And one of the journalists said, I'm sorry, but we're supposed to interview Mr. Karpov here. So can you please leave this room? And I was bold enough to say, yes, I can, but not before asking one question to Mr. Karpov.
What was it?
Mr. Karpov, what do you think of this position? We were still in the opening phase of our game analyzing, and I asked Mr. Karpov, what do you think of this position? And I still remember his reply vividly. He said, well, I've played this position with both colors in my career, but here I like white.
And you were black.
And I was black. So yeah, I guess it already went wrong somewhere in the opening for me, but at least it gave me a good memory.
Nice. And I think that is also a characteristic of those days in the 90s. It was still possible to go into the holiest of the holiest, which is the press room and the areas surrounding it. But that's no longer allowed. And I think it's logical that it's now more restricted, but it also had its charm that it was still possible, as you say, until a few decades ago, that you could go into those areas as an amateur and meet the top players there. In your case, even Anatoly Karpov. And I think that atmosphere, I mentioned already earlier in the podcast, that this combination of coziness and quaintness is so charming in Wijk and Zee. It's a little bit of a shame that that's gone away, but it was definitely still there. And actually, there is a nice quote from a famous Dutch writer, Godfried Bomans. He passed away already more than 50 years ago, but he was a chess player as well. And he wrote occasionally about his experiences in the Hoogovens Chess Tournament as well. And there is a nice quote from a small piece that he wrote in 1962, which I can read. It's translated from the Dutch, and it illustrates how amateurish the atmosphere was compared to in current days. He writes, "It's a lively place here in Beverwijk. The room buzzes like a beehive, and every now and then a sausage passes toward the man next to me, who apparently hasn't eaten yet. He bites off a piece and then sits there frozen, because his king isn't in the best position. It's also possible that he suddenly sees something that will be talked about for days. One often regrets that when in bed at night. Chess players who suddenly see something usually don't belong to the top class. Meanwhile, the sausage gets colder and colder, and when he finally moves his king to h1, he absent-mindedly pushes it into the ashtray, thinking it's a cigar. The man on the other side of me whistles. He's in time trouble and practicing carefreeness. If he weren't rocking his chair so much, I'd believe it. There are also players who tend to hum softly. This is to indicate, you haven't got me yet. And then there are the drummers. These people constantly drum their fingers on the table. Personally, I can't stand that all, although I have to admit that it's more sympathetic. Whistling and bustling encourages a carefree attitude that isn't there, while the drummer at least frankly admits to being in trouble. Nevertheless, it's maddening. Yeah, so it's a really funny description of the playing hall at the time. So you could still smoke there, and apparently it was also quite common to hum and to tap your foot. Well, that still happens, I guess, but also to talk occasionally to your opponent, which is something that is out of the question right now with all the strict arbiters there, watching very carefully, not only if you're carrying a device, but also if you're talking or making a sound.
To be honest, I actually still recognize that things are still happening these days as well. I played only a couple of years ago for the last time. And yeah, there is this hall full of players, and you're actually sitting quite tight, quite close to others next to you, left and right. And there's a lot of time. These are classical games, so there's also a lot of time to start being annoyed about certain behavior of certain players in your own group, or passing by, trying to pass by and hitting your chair. I know there's people who actually don't like to play in Wijk aan Zee because it's like that, but there's also people who just really like to be there. It's still like an annual reunion for a lot of people who only see each other once a year at Wijk aan Zee.
True.
So that makes the atmosphere special as well.
So let's talk a little bit about the history of the tournament. We've already spoken about the atmosphere and the amateur section, but what happened in the first years when the tournament was held? Can you tell a little bit about the winners, perhaps, and also some memorable moments in the early years?
Yeah, definitely. The history is very much connected with the sponsor that has always remained the same company. This company was founded in 1918 and was called Royal Hoogovens. It's a steel producing company and still is. And that Dutch name, Hoogovens, literally means high ovens. It should probably be translated as a blast furnace, where that is used to make the iron and the steel. We know that, especially in recent years, but actually already for decades, there have been quite a few protests about this, because it has become quite clear that this big factory in Wijk aan Zee in IJmuiden produces a lot of air pollution. The most recent protest, for example, was in January 2024 during the tournament, when the protest group Extinction Rebellion even blocked the only road to Wijk aan Zee for a while, and especially for the amateur players, it was a bit tricky to reach the village. At the same time, for the village, it's a very good thing that this tournament is held every year, because it definitely produces some sort of chess tourism in what is otherwise a slow, quiet period in a coastal town. Most of the tourism obviously comes in the summer for nice weather at the sea. In the winter, many of these places are very quiet. And so if you suddenly have a tournament every year where hundreds of people are coming to participate, it's very good for local economy, of course. So that's the other side of the coin. So yeah, it was called Hoogovens until 1998. Then there was a merge with the company British Steel. And that meant that between 1997 and 2008, the tournament was called after its new name, Corus, the Corus Chess Tournament. And then 2 decades later, when Tata Steel took over the company, it became the Tata Steel Chess Tournament. So the first edition, it was in 1938, and it already had about 40 participants, most of them from the Hoogovens Chess Club, because the company apparently had its own chess club. And there was also a top group, and that had only 4 players, and it was won by Philip Bakker. Just 2 years later, there were already some stronger players, because former world champion Max Euwe played that one, and he won the top group. And then we moved again 2 years further to 1942. We're now in the middle of the Second World War. The tournament had about 140 participants. The top group was now 6 players. And this was also the year when the famous pea soup that you mentioned earlier was introduced. The reason was not great. We're in war times now, and that meant that food was hard to come by. And as Peter Boel writes, In the book Kings, Queens and Rookies, about 85 years of Tata Steel Chess Tournament, published a few years ago, at the end of the tournament, the organizer Veldheer made the rounds of all the food shops in Beverwijk, gathering ingredients for a pea soup meal for 160 guests. The pea soup was the best pea soup they had ever tasted. And there and then, perhaps the most famous tradition of the chess tournament was born. To this day, every edition has been concluded with a pea soup meal for all participants.
Yes, I remember that concluding meal. It's a rich tradition indeed.
Yeah, and as you said, it's being served throughout the tournament itself as well. And you can smell it in the playing hall.
Absolutely.
So starting in 1938, we can still say that 1945 was the only year that the tournament was not held. That was the famous hunger winter, as we call it in the Netherlands, when the war had led to real poverty in our country, and also a very severe winter made the situation even worse for the Dutch. That was just, the conditions were too harsh for holding events like a chess tournament. But already from 1946 onwards, the tournament resumed with its first non-Dutch winner. That was Alberic O'Kelly de Galway from Belgium. O'Kelly, famous for the line in the Sicilian with 2a6. Then 1949, won by another famous old name from the old legends, Tartakower. 1950, the aforementioned Donner wins in his debut. He was 23 years old, and he managed to finish ahead of Max Euwe, already 49 at that point.
Yeah, so starting in the 50s, Euwe was always playing well in that tournament, as Jan Timman writes in his book about Max Euwe. He won in 1952. Donner actually came last. In 1953, there was a group of 12 players playing in the highest section, and also Limo won. He's also famous for a line in the Sicilian with Bishop b5. 1954, it was won by Hans Bouwmeester, Dutch international master who's still alive at 96, actually. And also he won it jointly with Pirk, again known for a very famous opening. 1956, Staalberg, the Swedish grandmaster, won. He was one of the candidates in the 1953 tournament in Zurich. 1957, Matanovic won. 1958, Donner and Euwe tied for first. And there's a funny anecdote associated with the 1958 tournament, which is described by Donner. It's related to the German player Emil Diemer, famous for the Blackmar-Diemer gambit, which he propagated. Donner writes the following. Emil Joseph Diemer's appearance doesn't suggest a man who is prepared to have a good laugh at himself from time to time. His gaunt shape, clothed in a suit, clearly indicated he has given up the idea that appearances could possibly matter. His pointed beak conspicuously jutting out and a twisted grin around his toothless mouth. That's how he moves about, with a slightly dancing gait. He is the type of man, we all know the sort, who is always knocking cups off the table. At the Beverwijk tournament recently, he fell from the stage. It was an accident, of course, but if the question had been asked before the tournament, which of the participants will fall from the stage, then insiders would have intoned in unison, Diemer.
Must have been quite the character, yeah. Wow. All right, so let me continue a few more years. 1959, a young Friedrich Olafsson from Iceland, who sadly died in early 25. He won the tournament. And then in 1960, we saw the first edition with Soviet players. One of them, Tigran Petrosyan, and the later world champion, tied for first with Bent Larsen from Denmark. The 1962 tournament had a bit of an interesting winner because it was Petar Trifunovic, famous for basically for drawing a lot of his games. And again, a nice description from Donner about Trifunovic, because Donner played in that group and lost to him somewhat unnecessarily, and was rather annoyed how the tournament ensued. And afterward he wrote, "And yet it hurts that of all people it had to be Trifunovic who won. There isn't a lazier drawing master in the whole wide world. Of the 19 games he played in Bled, he drew 15. He only lost to Bobby Fischer, while he won 3 games against players at the bottom of the standings. He has contributed a few notorious drawing variations to chess theory, and obviously holds the firm belief that winning or losing is an abnormal end to a chess game. In Beverwijk, he won 3 games and drew 6. Remarkably, that was enough for first prize. He was highly surprised. Winning the tournament definitely had not been his intention.
He just wanted to draw his games.
Yeah, exactly. And funnily enough, there is a very nice segment of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament website, which I recommend checking out for everyone who loves historical data. You can reach it by going to history.tatasteelchess.com. And one of the statistics they offer is players listed by draw percentage. And indeed, Petar Trifunovic is the participant in all those years, in all those 88 editions, with the highest drawing percentage of 84.62%. And further down the list, we see Alexander Chernin, Florin Georgiou, Gyula Sachs, and then a player from our time, Jan-Christoph Duda, just ahead of Peter Leko.
Leko was also known for draws, a bit unjustifiably so, I think.
Yeah, I think it was actually mostly later in his career when he started to become a little bit cautious. But the first 10, 15 years, Peter Leko was a very exciting and aggressive player, I believe. So the later games kind of twisted his statistics.
So from the 60s onwards, there happened something important. The Soviet players started participating in Beverwijk. First it was Beverwijk until 1968, then they moved to Wijk aan Zee. One interesting moment from those 60s is mentioned in the book Chess Curiosities by Tim Krabbe, and that happened in the game Bobotsov-Ivkov from the 1966 tournament, where there happened an extremely late case of castling. So White castled on the 46th move in that game, which was at the time of the book a record. Maybe it's not a record anymore, but I think castling on move 46 is extremely exceptional.
Nice, yeah. 66, by the way, won by one of those Soviets, Polygaevsky, the year after a world champion. Well, I should say a future world champion won in the last edition that was held in Beverwijk, which was Boris Spassky. And then, as you said, in 68, the event moved to Wijk aan Zee, where it was Viktor Korchnoi who won his first Wijk aan Zee tournament, 3 points ahead of Tal, Hort and Portisch.
Big names, as well as in 1969 when Botvinnik and Geller won. So possibly even bigger names.
Right, yeah. Botvinnik played in Wijk aan Zee. It is well known that from the period after the Second World War, the tournament became truly international, and since then only one world champion did not participate in Wijk aan Zee, and that was Bobby Fischer.
Yeah, it's a shame that Fischer never participated. Maybe he didn't like the amateurishness, I don't know. But it's a shame because in the 70s he could have booked some great results there. But instead it was the Hungarian player Lajos Portisch who won several times. Actually, in 72 he won, 75, and also in 78 he won unshared first. Quite impressive.
Yeah, we don't speak a lot about Portisch anymore, but he really was one of the absolute strongest players in the world in those 1970s and showed it in Wijk aan Zee.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, in 1980 the playing venue changed. They moved to the Moriaan. That year Yasser Seirawan won together with Walter Brown. And then in 1981 it was the first year that Jan Timman, the famous Dutch grandmaster, became shared first together with Genna Sosonko. And in 1982, it was John Nunn, famous for his books, but also a later winner. In 1982, he won for the first time together with Yuri Balashov.
1985 was a big year for the local fans because that was the year that Jan Timman won straight out. Unshared victory for the Dutchman. And one of his career's biggest successes, I guess, alongside his many candidates matches. And he won other tournaments like Bugojno. But 85 was a very nice tournament for him. And his later rival in the candidates, Nigel Short, won in 86. The English grandmaster was a young and upcoming player. And he was at the time 20 years old. By that moment, the youngest player who ever won in Wijk aan Zee. Short won again the next year, together with still going strong Viktor Korchnoi. And then the year that you already talked about, your first year that you visited, the 1988 tournament where Anatoly Karpov won. I also noticed that in '88, Simon Agtestein came in shared third place. Agtestein, famous for being a very strong grandmaster, but also playing for the Norwegian national football team, and later Magnus Carlsen's trainer. He was a good player. Coming third in Wijk aan Zee is not a bad feat.
No, indeed. He finished ahead of Tal, Hübner, and Farago.
Right.
So then we get to the 90s. In 1990, there happened something special. Peter, can you say something about that?
Yeah, that is a little anecdote that actually relates to what I was telling earlier, and that is that there has always been this mixed feeling about the sponsor in Wijk aan Zee. Over the years, the company's practices have sparked protests from environmental groups. I mentioned that it has happened recently in our time, but actually one of those groups was also active in 1990. I am quoting Peter Bull again from Kings, Queens and Rookies. The edition of 1990 was most remarkable, slightly crazy, one might even say. Before the tournament, an environmental action group called the Ministry of Defense of Wijk aan Zee removed all the white kings from the chessboards that had been set up for hundreds of games in the Moriaan. The kings were duly found after a feverish search in the dunes. Then, 3 rounds before the end of the tournament, during a stormy night, torrents of rain crashed through the roof of the Moriaan, forcing the organizers to find alternative venues for hundreds of chess players the next morning.
Wow, I think I played in 1990, but I don't remember this actually.
But it's crazy, of course, that imagine you're one of the arbiters and you're early, you're going into the playing hall. At some point you realize something is wrong and you're missing a king on one board and you're looking aside and you realize all kings are gone. This must be a horror for an arbiter, right?
It's a fantastic practical joke, actually.
Definitely. So one of my chess heroes, John Nunn, already mentioned. I loved his books, and I think I became a stronger player by one book in particular, Beating the Sicilian. Mr. Nunn actually was a very strong player himself, and apart from the '82 tournament, he actually won 90 and 91, finishing in clear first. So great success for John Nunn in those years. 1992 was won by Salov and Gelfand, but there's also an interesting story about the reserve master group in that year.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Frank van Harveld, sent me a tournament overview of the reserve master group in which he participated as well. And on third place, we find a very famous player, Peter Leko, who was still only 12 years old at the time. And he already participated as an amateur in the Wijk aan Zee tournament. So a nice example of a top grandmaster who also participated in the amateur event.
Right, starting as an amateur and then later becoming a grandmaster. And it only took 2 years for Leko to make his debut in the top group, actually, which was in '94. A group that had only 10 players that year, because in '94, Wijk aan Zee also hosted the candidates matches. I actually vividly remember that year because I was, of course, like all the chess fans, especially following the candidates match between Paul van der Sterren and Gata Kamsky. And on one of the days, there was a King's Indian in that match on the board, and I was standing next to Van der Sterren's second, Gert-Jan de Boer, and I happened to know a little bit of theory about the King's Indian, so I was very proud that I could discuss this opening and this game with Van der Sterren's second on an equal level almost.
Nice. Yeah, and I think in the year before, in 1993, something really curious happened as well, which we actually ranked as one of the fifth key moment of Wijk aan Zee that we wanted to discuss. And that involves Anatoly Karpov. You mentioned him already. I think in 93, it was a tournament where knockout matches were played, right?
Yeah, it was the first time that there was not a round robin as the highest group. The tournament experimented with a knockout system.
Yeah, and Karpov was participating. He was seeded into the second round. Yeah, he played 6 games against Larry Christensen, the American grandmaster. And in one of the games, Karpov actually lost in 11 moves. I think he blundered a full piece.
But he did end up winning that tournament. Yeah, this experiment of knockout was done only once again in '95, so the year after those candidates matches. I still remember, because of their surnames rhyming, that it was Dreyev beating Bareyev in the final. But after that, the tournament never tried knockout anymore. And in fact, starting from 1996, the top group was always a round robin of 14 players ever since, and still is.
Yeah, and 1996 is one of my most vivid memories in Wijk aan Zee. I actually participated in the tournament myself. And there's two moments that stand out for me from this edition. The first one is a game between Alexei Shirov and Jan Timman. Shirov played a great game with white and reached a good position upon ending. And at some point, I remember looking at the game as a spectator. At some point, Timman resigned. And indeed, he was a pawn down in a pawn end game, and it seemed over. I even joined them in the press room and saw the analysis between them, I think, and they concluded, yeah, it's a loss. But later it turned out that actually the final position in which Timman had resigned was a draw. It was a study-like draw, and Jan Timman is known for his love of chess studies, so it was very curious that he resigned this position, not having seen the study-like draw. And he describes this game in his book Fire on Board, and he adds a postscriptum to the analysis saying, actually, we found a draw afterwards. So initially, he still thought that it was winning, but then it turned out to have this study-like drawing mechanism. But then the most outstanding moment for me from the 1996 tournament was also a game by Shirov, but he was black in this game, and it was against Vasily Ivanchuk.
Yeah, I think this game that you're about to describe is still one of the most famous games ever played in Wijk aan Zee.
Yeah, and I think it features probably the most famous move ever played in Wijk aan Zee, because Ivanchuk sacrificed his queen in an extremely spectacular fashion. He had a queen on g4 with white, so you can picture the situation.
It was a Botvinnik Slav,
yeah.
Botvinnik semi-Slav, I should say.
Exactly, yeah. Very sharp theoretical line, and Shirov had prepared it. He also describes it in his book Fire on Board, because he has a whole chapter on the Botvinnik variation. And at some point, Ivanchuk had a queen on g4, and there was a white pawn on f6, and black had a bishop on f8 and a rook on h8. And Ivanchuk, out of the blue, played his queen from g4 to g7. But
not even taking a pawn.
No, he just moved it there. And there's a black bishop on f8, so that bishop could take the queen. And Shirov took the queen, and then Ivanchuk took back on g7 with his pawn, and then all kinds of complications happened, and Ivanchuk managed to play a brilliant game. It was really a spectacular moment, and I think I'm not the only one who remembers being a spectator and seeing that moment. But I think last week Peter Leko also described that moment when he commented in the World Blitz tournament, and he mentioned that he was also shocked to see Queen to G7. And it's really you should Google the game. It's easy to find the game. It's a fantastic game. It wasn't a perfect game. I think later analysis proved that it wasn't even the best move in the position, but still to play such a fantastic move, that was Ivanchuk's immortal game, I think.
In the end, Ivanchuk was rewarded for his adventurous play because he ended up winning that 1996 tournament. A year later, the event was won by a player we don't hear much about anymore, or nothing at all actually. The player was Valery Salov. And then in 1998, a tight victory for Anand and Kramnik. Personally, I remember 98 more for what happened in the B group, where Rustam Kazimjanov, the later FIDE world champion, was leading for most of the event. But the Dutch participant Dimitri Reinemann eventually, in the end, caught up with him and won the event. But what was remarkable about Reinemann is what he was playing with a color. He had dyed his hair in a color, I think it was purple hair, that was already quite special. And he was also, every now and then, he was wearing the T-shirt of the Dutch national football team. So a very different, way of presenting yourself in a chess tournament, and quite quirky, and I also think quite typical of Reinemann, who had a good success, and that meant that he qualified for playing in the A group in the next year. That next year, 1999, is the start of our next segment of this podcast, I believe.
Yes, it is, because in 1999 many interesting things happened. I think Dutch players remember 1999 as the year in which the Dutch international master Manuel Bosboom beat Garry Kasparov. Kasparov playing for the first time in Wijk, so that was already very special. And he managed to beat him in a blitz game. There was a blitz tournament held on the rest day, I think, and Bosboom was allowed to participate because Shirov had to go to the dentist, so he couldn't join. Kasparov, of course, didn't know Bosboom, so he was, I think, not very amused by having this unknown player enter the tournament.
By the way, just a bit of background. In those days, I don't know how many times they did it, but having a blitz tournament among the top participants of Wijk aan Zee was quite a special thing, quite enjoyable, because in those days blitz wasn't played that often at the top level. So having these super grandmasters playing blitz as well on one day, a lot of rounds on one day, was very exciting to see. And of course even more exciting because suddenly we had our blitz specialist. He was not a grandmaster. Bosboom is still an IM. But he's always been a super specialist in blitz. So I remember being very excited seeing Bosboom trying his luck against the world's best players.
Yeah, and now we are spoiled seeing all those grandmaster games, top grandmaster games online. But at the time, that was definitely not the case. So it was a really special blitz event. I was a spectator. There were not that many spectators, but I was one of them. And I remember being extremely thrilled to see all those games and to see Manuel Bosboom beat Garry Kasparov with black. It looked like a convincing game when we saw it, but in the end, I think there were some mistakes, but still an extremely impressive result from Manuel Bosboom, his immortal game. And it was only the start of what happened in 1999, because there was another really famous game, much more famous game, played by Garry Kasparov against Veselin Topalov.
Yes, and of course we were talking about this. This should probably be called Kasparov's immortal game. This famous, very long-term rook sacrifice in what was a Pirch defense by Topalov. And he was dragging the black king all the way to the first rank, and it was a very long combination. And by many it is seen as actually maybe the best game ever played in chess. So having that happening in Wijk aan Zee was very special, of course. I have mentioned the book Kings, Queens and Rookies already before. It was a book published on the occasion of 85 years of Tata Steel Chess Tournament a few years ago. And in that book, I wrote a few player profiles. And one of the players I spoke to for this book was Topalov, because I was actually quite interested in, bringing the perspective from the other side, because we always view this game, of course, from the side of the winner. But how was Topalov actually feeling about being on the losing side of maybe the most famous game ever played? I was very curious to hear from him. And Topalov told me I was very naive, looking back on his opening choice. I had never lost any time I played one e5 against him, but I was ambitious. The Bulgarian GM had prepared the Pirch defense, which he had played only twice before in his career. This preparation from 20 years ago, I don't know. We must have looked like total amateurs, said Topalov. Everyone prepared for 10 to 15 moves maximum. Thanks to all his matches, Garry was 10 moves ahead of everyone. The game became famous for an amazing sequence of 12 moves in the middle game, where the black king was forced all the way down to d1. No matter how many times you've seen the game, it remains absolutely mesmerizing. Topalov removes a touch of the magic when he notes, Garry said he'd seen the whole line, but I don't think that's true. But at some point, it just became forced. I don't think he'd seen the final position. It actually could have gone all differently, because White sacrificed a rook on move 24, which was a forced move according to Topalov, because otherwise White would be worse. But taking that rook wasn't forced at all. Topalov could have moved his king to the side and ignoring it. But, he said, I went for the line because I realized the position was a bit funny. Again, I was a bit naive because it was not very practical. I show this line when I teach students as an example of a bad practical choice. It makes sense to accept the rook sack only if you're winning. What I did was suicide. Well, chess history is happy that he made that crazy decision, because we would otherwise never have seen this amazing game unfold as it did.
Yeah, it always takes two people to play a fantastic game. But I must say, I sympathize with Topalov in two respects. The first is that I think he's right. Kasparov probably didn't see everything until the finest detail, but he saw many ideas. I think he also said that in an interview at some point. He saw the main ideas, and then indeed it all fell into place. But I also feel for Topalov because he was also on the receiving end of another famous game that was played the year before in 1998 against Shirov, where Shirov played this amazing bishop h3 move in a opposite bishop ending, sacrificing a full bishop, the only move to throw a full bishop actually, but also the only winning move. And there Topalov also lost, and he also was part of that game. And he also,
by the way, that game was in Linares.
It was in Linares, yeah, and he helped produce that brilliancy from Shirov. So, yeah, he must have mixed feelings about both games.
And we've mentioned quite a bit already about that 1999 edition, the first of 3 tournaments won by Kasparov. But actually, we're not done yet with that year, 1999.
No, 1999 is also a special year for me because I have a really curious anecdote related to that tournament. I was actually selling books for the Schaak & Go winkel in Wijk aan Zee that year. And I played a blitz tournament. I played against a young girl. And I saw her and her father the day after that tournament at the book place. And the guy spoke to me and asked me if I knew Amsterdam and if I knew a shop in Amsterdam that sold radio devices. So I told him, yeah, I know Amsterdam. I'm from Amsterdam. So what is it that you need? And he said, yeah, let's go to Amsterdam on the rest day. I need to buy a radio device, and I'll tell you more about it. So I said, okay, well, let's do that. I'll meet you at the station in Amsterdam, and then we'll go. And then on the rest day, he arrived at the station. I waited for him. And he also had taken his daughter. And it turned out that was Alexandra Kostenyuk, the later women's world champion. And they indeed wanted to buy some radio device in Amsterdam. So I took them on the tram in Amsterdam. And we went to a shop. And we bought that device for him. I never learned why he needed it, to be honest. Perhaps he couldn't buy it in Russia. But it was a great day with Kostenyuk and her father. And I have very fond memories. I wrote about it on Chess Vibes a couple of years later. And for me, it was a really special moment. And again, an example where an amateur or a book salesman, like I was at the time, could meet already quite well-known and famous chess players.
Nice story, yeah. Alexandra and I was, I think, the title.
Yes,
you used
Alexandra and I.
For that article, yeah. All right, so as I said, Kasparov won 3 years in a row, 1999, 2000 and 2001. The only 3 years that he participated, he won all 3 events. A nice anecdote is also that when he arrived in Wijk aan Zee for the second time in the year 2000, he actually demanded the same hotel room number 208 in Hotel Zeeduin, because I guess he has a bit of superstition in him, like many chess players. And when things go well, he doesn't want to change much. And I don't know if it helped, but he did win the other 2 events that he played in as well. And about 2001, I also remember one other player from Russia, which was Alexei Fedorov. And what I really liked is that, well, this player actually played the King's Gambit a few times, indeed. I believe. Yeah, seeing the King's Gambit played at the highest level is always nice.
Yeah, so we've had 7 key moments already. We now come to the 8th one, and that starts with Magnus Carlsen. So the beginning of the Magnus Carlsen era. He participated for the first time in the year 2004. Peter, do you remember when he joined for the first time?
Yeah, this was actually the first year that the tournament organized a Grandmaster Group C. So there had been already an A group and a B group, and before they were working with what we call the Reserve Master Group, or the highest 10-round event. But starting from 2004, they were calling the third group, as you might call it, the Grandmaster Group C, usually with a few Grandmasters in it and a few IMs also. So also ideally a group where you could score a Grandmaster norm. And one of the players who made his debut in Wijk aan Zee there was Magnus Carlsen, aged 13 at the time. The Dutch Grandmaster Erwin Lamy wrote about this. In 2004, on the eve of the tournament, Jan Smeets, who is, by the way, another Dutch grandmaster and happens to be born on the same day as Erwin Lamy, Jan Smeets told me about the competition he was going to face in the C group in Wijk aan Zee. One boy bothered him somewhat, a young Norwegian kid that he saw as a threat to his ambition to promote to the B group. I had seen some stories about the boy, but as I am not easily impressed, I assured Jan that all this was probably blown out of proportion. Surely a country without much chess history couldn't suddenly produce an extraordinary player. A couple of weeks later, Magnus Carlsen won the C group with a +8 score, showing a slight judgment error from my side. And in fact, also for the Kings, Queens and Rookies book that I mentioned before, I also spoke with Magnus, and I asked him for some of his own memories from Wijk aan Zee, and he started talking about that first appearance in 2004. He told me, in the C group we played on the side of the main stage, and we weren't allowed to watch the games of the A and B groups. Before the last round, I had almost secured tournament victory as I was a point ahead. I played black versus Jan Smeets, and I had been told that maybe there would be an opportunity to watch the top games. So you cannot believe it anymore, right? That somebody like Magnus Carlsen wasn't actually allowed to the podium. But anyway, that was the situation, and well, maybe he could for the last round. Anatoly Karpov was there as well, I remember, as an honorary guest, so it was a big deal. I was excited. At some point, one of the arbiters said, "You may watch now." I was excited and didn't really know what to do. I kind of panicked and sort of ran through the hall, along the tables, not knowing what to do with myself. I looked at the positions as quickly as I could and just ran back. I didn't dare to look anyone in the eye. Oh, and I also remember speaking to Viswanathan Anand at the closing ceremony, who had won the A group. He congratulated me. I never forgot that. So yeah, great anecdotes about the first participation of many for Magnus Carlsen. In fact, already next year, of course, he played in B group because he had promoted to the B group, where he finished somewhere in the middle. It was actually Sergei Karyakin, born in the same year as Carlsen, who won that B group. The A group was won by Peter Leko. And then 2006, we see winners Anand and Topalov, while Magnus Carlsen this time managed to win that B group together with Alexander Motilov. And so in 2006, Carlsen promoted to the A group for 2007. That year, 2007, which, by the way, for me was my debut as a video journalist, and we spoke about it in the previous episode, Toilet Gate. But 2007 was the year when Levon Aronian, Veselin Topalov, and Temur Rajabov shared first place, and Carlsen and Shirov finished together in last place. And I remember journalists saying that, yeah, well, Magnus is still a little bit too young for the absolute top level, right? This tournament came too early for him. But then a month later, in February 2007, I remember Carlsen finishing in an excellent second place in Linares behind Anand. And suddenly the journalists had to reassess their judgment, just like Erwin Lamy had to reassess his, that Magnus was really the real deal.
Yeah, and in the year after, in 2008, he won the tournament together with Levon Aronian. Although he didn't win in 2009, so that was Sergei Karyakin. He won that one. And then 2010, it was the last Corus tournament. So before it was renamed to Tata Steel. And Carlsen did win. He finished ahead of Kramnik and Shirov. Shirov had started with 5 out of 5, by the way, but then he faltered. And that was really the moment when Carlsen started to dominate the chess world. Although 2011 was won by Hikaru Nakamura. And Peter, there was a moment in that tournament which you remember quite vividly.
Yeah, that was also one of those games that you will remember for forever, perhaps, because it was one of those special end games, and it also ended in a result that it should not have ended in. I'm talking about the theoretical end game where one player has a rook and a knight, and the other player only has a rook. And as we know, this should be a fairly easy draw, but it went differently in the game between Magnus Carlsen and Erwin Lamy in 2011. And Erwin wrote about it himself, and he pointed out something that is also, we haven't talked about it yet, but also very typical for the Wijk aan Zee atmosphere, and that is that the amateur players and the spectators, they can get quite close to the players and they can watch the stage, the podium where the games are playing from just a few meters away. So Aaron talks about this special relationship with the spectators when he was playing this long endgame with Magnus. He writes, something that is distinctly belonging to Wijk aan Zee, or perhaps I just haven't noticed it anywhere else, is the very light sound of people whispering. Even though everybody tries their best to be silent or keep their voices as low as possible, the many, sometimes hundreds of spectators together produce a tiny rustling sound. It's a sound that is hard to describe, and I don't hear it during play unless I really pay attention. However, I remember very well how at this point, he means the point that he actually blundered his rook and ended up losing that drawn endgame. I remember very well how at this point that whispering sound became really stronger as people realized what was unfolding. I had just blundered my rook. To this day, I am regularly reminded of this endgame. Every time when it appears in the game, there will be a commentator pointing out that it's a pretty trivial draw, although it was once lost by Lamy.
Yeah, and it was also once lost by Judith Polgar against Kasparov.
True, yeah, that was in the 90s. Yeah. All right, so 2012, Levon Aronian wins, and then 2013, back to Magnus Carlsen. His first sole victory, scoring 10 out of 13. It was ahead of the famous 2013 candidates, by the way, when he would qualify for the World Championship. So in January of that year, he was in excellent shape and won convincingly.
Yeah, in 2014, Levon Aronian won again. The tournament was called the Masters Tournament by then. And then there was a Challengers group, which was the B group.
Right, so no more Grandmaster Group C.
No, but it was Masters and Challengers. Yeah, Carlsen won several more times. 2015, he won in 2016 as well. 2017 was taken by Wesley So. And in 2018, and that is the final moment that we want to discuss, not so much this year, but that was the rise of Anish Giri, another big Dutch name. 2018 was the tournament where Anish Giri lost the playoff to Carlsen. He played a fantastic tournament, Anish, but then in the end he had to bow to Carlsen.
Which, by the way, was somewhat ironic because 2018 was the first time that the tournament regulations had a blitz playoff in case of a tie. Before that, the tournament always had the tradition of simply having multiple winners. And if that tradition had been kept, then Anish Giri could have called himself already a winner of the Wijk aan Zee tournament in 2018.
Yeah.
But because they introduced the blitz playoff, he ended up having to play that blitz playoff and lost to Carlsen.
Yeah, and in the year after, in 2019, he again came behind Carlsen. He was half point behind him. So Giri still had to wait his moment. 2020, Carlsen didn't win it, actually. Fabiano Caruana played a fantastic tournament. And then in 2021, there was the pandemic raging. There was just one group. There was a tournament, so it was not like 1945, the Hunger Winter, but there was a tournament, although it was just one group, and there were no spectators. And actually, Giri still had to wait for his moment because he lost the playoff, the blitz playoff, this time not to Carlsen, but to his compatriot Jordan van Foreest, who played an amazing tournament. I think the best of his life, for sure. And Giri he was very frustrated, actually losing, but he still had to wait his moment. And ultimately, that moment came only in 2023. Still in 22, it was Carlsen, but in 23, Anish Giri became the first Dutch winner since Jan Timman in 1985.
Yeah, that was a great success, and we were really. I know that everyone was very happy for Anish because he had been so close so many times already, and he also had a bit of a reputation that although he had been a world-class player and reached the top 5 in the world, he didn't win that many absolute super tournaments yet, and he started to be mocked about it for a bit. So it was a big relief for him and for all his fans that he ended up winning this super tournament, and I can say in 23.
Yeah, and it was a great tournament with strong participation. So Abdusattorov came second together with Carlsen, and also Arjun Erigaisi was still a youngster at the time. He finished last, but he was also playing. So in 24 and 25, both tournaments finished in a Blitz playoff. In 24, it was Wijk who won the Blitz. And in 25, it was Pragnananda who won. Both of them finished before Gukesh, the later world champion. So who knows, maybe in 26 it will be Gukesh's year.
Yeah, let's see. And now that we've gone through all the tournaments, we know also who won most times. I had this little list of most tournament victories. So obviously Magnus Carlsen is the clear record holder with 8 victories. And below him we see Viswanathan Anand with 5 victories. And then there are only 4 players who won the tournament 4 times. That is maybe a nice chess trivia. Those 4 players are Max Euwe, Levon Aronian, Viktor Korchnoi and Lajos Portis.
So these were our 10 moments or 10 key points to discuss from the Wijk aan Zee tournament through its rich history. Peter, are there any other things that we haven't discussed yet that are worth mentioning?
I think we went through it all. I can only think of maybe one more anecdote, like a bonus story apart from the 10 we talked about, and it's related to the amateur groups that are playing in the same playing hall as the grandmasters. Of course, there is a division between those 2 areas, and there the spectators can be walking around and they can look at the grandmasters, and there are also television screens that show the games of the top players. So it's like live board positions as you see them on your own computer screen, but they put different chess boards on different television screens, which is a great service because you can always see what's going on all the boards. And the anecdote is a little bit about that, because I remember one year, it was probably in 2004 or 5 or 6 maybe, that another Carlsen was actually playing in Wijk aan Zee, and that is Henrik Carlsen, the father of Magnus. He was playing in one of the amateur groups, and he was playing against a Dutch amateur. And the opening, I think it was a Nimzo Indian, and the Dutch amateur told me this story that he noticed Henrik constantly looking to the left. To his left were the television screens a few meters away, and of course, the amateur thought, that's so nice. Henrik wants to see how Magnus is doing, right? He's playing his own game, but he also wants to keep an eye on how his son is doing. And when Henrik was looking to the left for like the 4th or 5th time, the amateur player opposite of him decided to also check how Magnus is doing. So he also looked at the television screen, and to his little horror, he noticed that the opening was in the exact same position as they had on the board. So from that point, he was feeling that maybe Henrik had another reason of following that game, actually.
Is that cheating? I guess not.
No, I don't know, actually. Yeah, it's kind of, it feels a bit unfair. But Henrik is such a great character and such a correct person that I don't really think that he was trying to copy his son's move, to be honest. But it's a clear example of how things are going in Wijk aan Zee, with the combination of grandmasters and amateurs all in one hall, and everyone able to enjoy each other's play. There have also been situations where top grandmasters who were finishing their games were walking around in the playing hall and actually looking at amateur players. I remember, for example, a really last story for the podcast, that I once played against the wife of Luc van Wely, Lorena Cepeda. And at some point, Luc was walking around and he was actually looking at our position. So the opposite can also happen, where a grandmaster actually checks out the amateur games.
Nice. Well, then I think there's only one thing left to say, and that is see you in Wijk aan Zee this year.
See you in Wijk aan Zee for the 88th edition. Thank you for the nice podcast, and see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks.